I met Medea Benjamin in 2002, I think, and I went to a thing in DC, and I was very green, actually, not very young, but very green as a peace activist, a true political activist, and we had the most interesting conference with Helen Caldicott and all kinds of. I could remind you some more about how interesting it was and all the intrigue and the march and everything else that we were trying to fight the Bush era war machine. Well, we're still fighting the war machine. We're fighting it all the harder now because we all pay in ways that Medea will make very clear to us. And we'll have some ways, special ways to recognize her in a minute. But I'd rather give the talk over right now to have, we have our, Marie Schuster is both our board secretary and our task force co-chair of the Resist Militarism Task Force. So I'm going to let her introduce Medea to you, and we'll listen to Marie. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Medea Benjamin is the co-founder of the women-led peace group Code Pink and the co-founder of the human rights group Global Exchange. She's been an advocate for social justice for more than 40 years and has been described as one of America's most committed and most effective fighters for human rights by the New York Newsday. She's also one of, are we not in the microphone? Oh, Marie. Oh, Marie. All right. Well, Medea's here. Medea's inspiring creativity and determined campaigns forge new ways to build peace and justice in the movement. Since September 11th, 2001, Medea has been working to promote U.S. foreign policy that would respect human rights and gain us allies instead of contributing to further violence. During the Bush administration, Medea could be found literally speaking truth to power, announcing war criminal coming through as Donald Rumsfeld or John Bolton passed by. And this is an ongoing activity, and we're very grateful for it. Medea has been on the forefront of the anti-drone movement, an issue very close to home as we sit in the shadow of the Niagara Falls Air Force Base. She's published Drone Warfare, Killing by Remote Control in 2013, organized the first ever International Drone Summit, and led delegations to Pakistan and Yemen to meet with drone strike victims. The campaign against weaponized drones has helped reduce the number of civilian casualties and forced the government to compensate the families of those innocent victims. Medea has participated in the Freedom Flotillas, was in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian uprising, and part of a 2012 human rights delegation to Bahrain in support of democracy activists, where she was tear-gassed, arrested, and deported by the Bahraini government. In 2015 and 2018, she participated in Women Cross the DMZ, an international delegation of women calling for peace in Korea. This past summer, you could find Medea defending the Venezuelan embassy from being handed over to representatives of the US-appointed and self-proclaimed interim president, Juan Guaido. These are just a few examples of when Medea has put herself on the line in the fight for peace. All she has done and what she means to people all over the world who are working for justice cannot be properly summed up by me or here tonight. But we are truly honored to have the real deal with us tonight and to have her share with us this evening. So please join me in welcoming Medea Benjamin.
It's a real honor to be here tonight and to get a chance to speak to you, and especially coming right after Valentino spoke. I want to just honor you and your mom, and I just think of all the years that you spent behind bars in a criminal, racist, unjust system, and how you said that a lot of this revolved around greed. And when I think of what our U.S. foreign policy is, so much of that revolves around greed. So here we have a criminal injustice system in the US where people make money putting other people in prison. I mean, that's just sick. That's just wrong. Absolutely wrong. Nobody should make money by putting people in prison. And nobody should make money from killing people in wars. And that's what we have, which is a system where a lot of people make money by keeping the wars going. And you know, a number of us here are older folks. We go back to the Vietnam War days, where I go back. And I learned then, I'm not going to believe what my government tells me. And when they send young men over, and now it's young men and young women, over to fight people thousands of miles away and make up some stories about why we should hate those people, I don't hate any people. We shouldn't hate people. There's no reason to hate people in other countries. They make that stuff up. Just like the racism at home to try to divide us. And so we fast forward after 9/11, when we had options after 9/11. There's a way we could have reacted. We could have brought to justice the people that did us harm. That means capturing them and trying them. Instead, it was used as an opportunity to go to war. To stay in those wars now, about 20 years later, is insane. It makes no sense at all, but you know what? It's made a lot of money for a lot of companies. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Pentagon contractors, not the soldiers who are doing the fighting. A lot of them need food stamps to be able to take care of their families. But it's the big companies that are making money on those wars. And I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of those wars. And you know what else? The majority of the American people are sick and tired of those wars. Whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, no party at all, they are sick and tired of the wars. And that's what poll after poll after poll shows. And so you know what happens? There's a racist guy in the White House. And some people say, oh, he's an idiot. You know, he's no idiot. He didn't get to where he is by being an idiot. He is a smart guy. And what he figured out is that the American people are sick and tired of wars. And that's why he talks about it all the time. He talked about it during his campaign, and he talks about it now. And you know, I don't believe anything that comes out of that guy's mouth. But when he sounds most sincere is when he talks about wanting to end those, what he calls crazy, endless wars. You listen to him in those rallies. He sounds like he means it. And so you know what? The people think he means it. And a lot of people who've been bamboozled by him think that he is a guy who wants to end those wars. Well, let me tell you, Donald Trump is not a guy who wants to end the wars. And let me give you a couple of reasons why. Well, he has done a couple of good things. And we should recognize when he wanted to talk to Kim Jong-un in North Korea, that is a good thing. And unfortunately, there are Democrats that then come back and say, oh, we shouldn't be talking to him because, you know, Democrats want to say whatever he does is wrong. Sometimes he does a good thing. But then he says he's going to get the troops out of Syria. What does he do? He moves them around. He moves them somewhere else. He moves them into Iraq. He moves them into Jordan. And he sends more troops into Saudi Arabia. If you recall why Osama bin Laden, one of the reasons he said he hated the United States, why? American troops in Saudi Arabia, in the Holy Lands, because under George H. Bush, we sent over 100,000 Americans into Saudi Arabia. And that's when Osama bin Laden said, going after the United States. And what did Trump do just now? Send troops into Saudi Arabia. And he says he wants to end the wars, but he's put 14,000 more troops into the Middle East than when he came in. So he's not taking troops out. He's shuffling them around. And he's saying he's taking them out. And it's who said oil? You said oil. He's exactly. But, you know, at least he's clearer than a lot of people have been in the White House. He says, if I went into Iraq, at least I would have taken the oil. And now he says in Syria that we're there to guard the oil. Yeah, we're there to guard the oil from ISIS, he says. And we're there to guard the oil from the Saudi government. I mean, the Syrian government. You know what? It's not our oil. It's not our oil. We shouldn't be guarding the oil because it's not our oil. And aside from that, we want the oil to stay in the ground, right? That's what we need. Keep it in the ground. Let me give you some more reasons, because people say to me a lot that Donald Trump really wants to bring the troops out. He's just put so much pressure every time he tries to do something. The deep state gets in there and says you can't do it. Well, you know what? Who did Donald Trump put in as his national security advisor? John Bolton. John Bolton, the Uber hawk. Uber hawk, who wants to go bomb all over the world, invade all over the world. If you're really a president that wants to get us out of endless wars, you don't make John Bolton your national security advisor. You don't make Mike Pompeo your Secretary of State, another Uber hawk. And then look at who he put in Secretary of Defense. They keep leaving, but he puts them in. So first he put one from General Dynamics. Then he put one in from Boeing. No, Raytheon was the second one. A lobbyist for Raytheon. And then he puts in somebody from Boeing. So, you know, he is doing the bidding of these companies. And then we can look at other things that Donald Trump has done. Where's the first place he went to after he got into the White House? Saudi Arabia, the first foreign country. He could have gone to Canada. Could have gone to Mexico. He went to Saudi Arabia, the first country he goes to. And brags, he's a salesman for the weapons industry. He brags and brags and brags about how many weapons he's sold. But, you know, Barack Obama sold a lot of weapons to Saudi Arabia as well. But there is a difference because Donald Trump has gotten so close to the Saudis that after in Congress, who had been not paying attention to all the weapons sales, saying fine, 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 go kill people in Yemen, who cares? It took a Washington Post reporter to get killed, Jamal Khashoggi, you remember? Where he got chopped up with a bone saw in a consulate, Saudi consulate in Turkey, and then disappeared his remains. It took that to change the mind, and a lot of work on a lot of our parts here, including these wonderful young students who just got rewarded, to get Congress to say, we don't want to sell more weapons to the Saudis. It should have been because they saw that those weapons were being used to bomb school buses and kill Yemeni children, to bomb weddings, to bomb funerals, to bomb marketplaces, clinics, hospitals. But, you know, we don't see that stuff on our TV screens. So it took a Washington Post reporter to change the minds of a lot of people in Congress. But they did change their minds, and they said, okay, we don't want to sell any more weapons to the Saudis to kill people in Yemen. And guess what Donald Trump did when it got to his desk? Vetoed it over and over, vetoed it. Because he wants to keep selling those weapons. Is that a guy that's going to get us out of wars? No. And in fact, I think that even more than what's happening now in Ukraine, the war in Yemen and his irresponsible act of refusing to listen to Congress that said no to that war in Yemen, and the American people who said no to that war in Yemen, The American people who said, we don't want to keep killing those innocent kids in Yemen. That should be a reason to impeach Donald Trump. And you want to know another reason? There's a lot of reasons we should impeach Donald Trump. But you want to know another good reason to impeach Donald Trump? One of the best things of Barack Obama's foreign policy was that he came to sign a treaty, a nuclear treaty with Iran. And that was not just a treaty between the U.S. and Iran. It was a treaty that was signed by the European countries, by Russia, by China. It was ratified by the United Nations. And Donald Trump came in and said, I'm going to rip that treaty up. And what did he do? He ripped that treaty up. And now we are on the brink of another war with a heavily armed and trained Middle Eastern country with 80 million people. Is this a man that wants to get us out of wars? This is a man who is putting us on a collision course with Iran right now. And the last thing I want to say, when anybody might say this ridiculous thing about Donald Trump wants to get us out of these wars, is look at the Pentagon budget. The Pentagon budget that Donald Trump wants to give the Pentagon more money than the Pentagon has even asked for. The Pentagon has an obscene amount of money, and Donald Trump wants to give him even more. So this is not a man that's going to get us out of these endless wars. We have to recognize, though, that the American people do want to get out of them. In fact, there was a poll done, an absolutely fascinating poll. You remember when the Saudi oil fields were just like blown up? We don't know still who did it. The Houthis in Yemen said they did it. The U.S. said it was the Iranians. Who knows? But Donald Trump was going to respond to bomb something in Iran. The polls showed that only 13% of Americans were in favor of the United States bombing Iran to support our, quote, Saudi allies. 13%, that's nothing. The vast majority said, no way. And so it's so fascinating right now. The American people are with us in that sentiment of wanting to stop the crazy foreign policy that we have. And we have had from Democrat and Republican administrations. So let me just lay out, for those of you who are not foreign policy wonks, just some basic things about what a just foreign policy would look like. Because we talk about the Green New Deal. We need a Green New Deal desperately. But there will be no Green New Deal unless we have peace. Because who is the #1 institutional polluter in the world? The military. The military destroys the communities that it bombs. It destroys the communities where it has bases, whether it's here in the United States or overseas. And we also know that climate crisis creates the foundations for a lot of wars and will in the future. And so it's a vicious circle that we need to stop. And one of the ways to stop it is by inserting ourselves in the crazy militaristic foreign policy that we have had and say we need something totally different. And what we need totally different is one that is simply going to reject U.S. military and economic intervention in other countries. Period. We need a foreign policy that doesn't put $1 trillion more into modernizing nuclear weapons, when the world is crying out for an end to nuclear weapons, and when the United Nations passed a treaty to ban all nuclear weapons, we need to sign the damn treaty and abolish all nuclear weapons. I mentioned how the Pentagon destroys the lands where it has bases, and we have so many bases in this country. But you know we have over 800 military bases around the world? I mean, some of these bases are relics from World War II. They don't serve a purpose anymore. You know why they're there? They're there because they're there. I mean, basically, that's it. They're there because they've been there. They're there because not enough of us rise up to say they shouldn't be there. But we could save about $100 billion by closing those overseas military bases and bringing our soldiers back home to protect us here at home, not to make enemies overseas. So closing the military bases would make us more secure because there are so many people around the world that are fighting to get rid of those military bases. And the other thing is to do what I said Donald Trump is not going to do, which is to bring our troops out of Afghanistan, out of Syria, out of Iraq, to stop selling or giving weapons to human rights abusers, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Israel or countries like Egypt, to stop creating a new Cold War with Russia. And that's a really important one. And I think we have a lot of people in this room who probably call yourself Democrats. But there are people in the Democratic Party who are really fomenting this idea that Russia is our enemy. And it's a dangerous thing because we cannot afford other enemies. We cannot afford to have Russia as our enemy, just as we cannot afford to have China as an enemy. China is not our enemy. And what we see is that all that spending on military money, on the military, they're saying, well, now we need to pivot to Asia. And we need to be ready to fight really big countries like Russia and China. And that just feeds into this idea that we have to pour more and more money into the Pentagon. There are 3 words that I think might have been the smartest words that Donald Trump ever uttered, and that is NATO is obsolete. NATO, a military alliance that was formed after the World Wars, should be obsolete now that there is no Soviet Union. And so that should be part of a progressive foreign policy, is to call for the abolition of NATO. Now, of course, Donald Trump said it, but what does he do? He plunges right in there in NATO and says, no, we don't want to destroy NATO. What we want is all you other countries to pay up, to pay more for NATO. No, that's not what we want. And let me tell you, I travel a lot to those other countries. The people in those other countries don't want to put more money into their militaries. They want to use their money for good things that benefit their own people. A progressive foreign policy would focus on creative diplomacy. And a progressive foreign policy would be one that takes a serious look at the obscene, bloated Pentagon budget and would say, what can we cut? Where do we make those cuts that would actually bring us hundreds of billions of dollars to use for things that we need and would make us safer at home? And now it's so interesting because there's a coalition that's been going around, and we've been meeting with all the staff of all the Democratic presidential candidates. And we've been asking them, what would you cut from the military? Because they tend not to talk about foreign policy very much. And when they talk about the military budget, they just kind of throw it out there, but without real numbers. And you know, Elizabeth Warren's got a plan for everything. We ask her, where's your plan for cutting the Pentagon budget? And recently she came out when she was getting a lot of flack about how you're going to pay for your Medicare for All plan. And she said she would cut what's called the overseas contingent operations, which is a chunk of money that's supposed to go for war, but it is a slush fund. And she said she would cut that, which is a very good thing to cut. She has also talked about cutting some of the money for nuclear weapons. And Bernie Sanders has talked about cutting some of the Pentagon money, but without putting numbers on it. And I think we need those numbers. We need people to see and to recognize that it's okay. In fact, it's a good thing to talk about saving money by closing military bases, by stopping the money for obsolete weapon systems, for stopping money for the most expensive weapon system, the F-35 that was ever produced, that is probably never going to fly or be anything of what it was sold that it was going to be.
Get rid of the Space Force.
The Space Force, putting money into creating a new Space Force. So there's all kinds of ways that we could save money. And then we have to talk about what we would put that money into. And that's where we have a chance to create these great coalitions that we are creating now, and we have to create even more. You talked about working with the NAACP and the Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign has embraced the issues, as Martin Luther King did, of fighting against racism, poverty, and militarism, and have added the environmental destruction to that. And we have been working a lot with people. I mean, we are people in the climate movement as we are part of the peace movement. It is and needs to be one movement. But when people say, how are you going to pay for the Green New Deal, what do we say?
With a military budget.
Take it from the Pentagon. There's one big fat pot of gold, and that is the Pentagon budget. And that could go to do so many good things in the world that are so necessary, whether it's the Green New Deal, whether it's a healthcare system that would provide real health care to everyone, like Medicare for All, whether it's allowing our students, like students in other countries, to go to college because they want to learn and not be saddled with a debt peonage after they graduate. There are so many things that we need that money for. But we have to start demanding that our politicians give us plans about how they're going to cut the Pentagon budget and what they're going to use that money for. I want to just talk about where we can be better at creating more of a movement to get us out of this war economy. You know, I mentioned that our media doesn't show us the pictures of the kids that we bomb in Yemen. Our media doesn't talk much about what's happening in the world at all. Right. In fact, some of us, well, how many of you listen to Democracy Now? Yay. If you don't, you should. Amy Goodman, a good hour every day, a dose of what's happening at home and abroad. But if you turn on the cable news, you see very, very little about what's happening in the world. And that's why we have a population that is quite indifferent and uneducated when it comes to our policies overseas. But it's so important that we have these educational events and we do more and more education. I'm so glad we have university students here with us. There was a study that the New York Times did that asked people to try to locate countries like North Korea on a map. And of course, the vast majority of Americans couldn't find it. But what they found is when people are more able to locate countries on a map, They are more interested in having diplomacy with those countries instead of bombing them. It has been said that that war is the way that Americans learn geography, and we've got to stop that. We got to learn geography so that we don't go to war with other countries. You've probably all heard about the environmental movement, and maybe you're part of the campaign that the environmental movement has been doing for over a decade now, to say we've got to take our money out of big oil. It is a key thing, and trillions of dollars have been taken out of investments in fossil fuels. And when it comes to the prison system that we talked about, there's a great campaigns to say, don't invest money in private prisons. A very successful campaign that's going on now. But we need the same kind of campaign that says, take the money out of companies that profit from war. We need to say to the banks, to the pension funds, to our cities, our universities, wherever there's invested money, we need to say, don't support Northrop Grumman, don't support Lockheed Martin, and don't support the NRA. It's got to be seen as dirty money to be invested in companies that only profit from killing people. So we have a campaign and invite you to join, and we work with many other groups called Divest from the War Machine. You can look it up online, Divest from War Machine, or go to my organization's website, which is codepink.org, and join that campaign. I mentioned that we have to join up with the efforts around the environment, and there was a fabulous one today in Washington, D.C. that is a great example of the kind of things that we can do. And this is getting a famous person like Jane Fonda, who's been coming she actually moved for 4 months to Washington, D.C. because she was so inspired by the young environmentalists like Greta Thunberg, like the indigenous community, young people, like the young people who have gone out from the schools and into the streets. And so she's come to Washington, D.C., and every Friday does something called Fire Drill Fridays, and comes and does an educational rally, and then invites people who want to do civil disobedience to do it. Very different from you, Valentino, which is people that are choosing to get arrested. But it's making a point to say, the earth is on fire, we've got to do something about it. And it can't be business as usual. And every week she pairs up with another issue, women in the environment. And this week was the militarism and the environment. So we had veterans there today. We had groups like Code Pink there today. We had people from Peace Action there today, standing with Jane Fonda and getting arrested. And I just want to say that Jane Fonda, and Valentina, I'm going to go back to you again because you talked about the white woman who was wearing the T-shirt that got you in trouble for saying about it. Jane Fonda recognizes her whiteness and her privilege. And she says, yeah, I can do this and go to jail, and nothing's going to happen to me because I'm white and I'm famous. But she did... God, how rude. She did... after you go to jail, do civil disobedience in the Capitol 3 times, you do get locked up overnight. Jane Fonda is 82 years old, and she doesn't have to be doing this. She could be doing a lot of other things with her time than sleeping on a metal slab in a cold jail cell, getting a bologna sandwich, and seeing what it looks like inside the jails. And she came out of there shocked because she said, everybody else in there was black. She said, I knew this country was racist, but seeing it up close like that, with people in prison for such minor things, so many of them for minor things. And another form, and absolutely, and she said it, seeing these black men, she said, shackled in that prison, really, really affected her. And that's why I give her credit for doing this. And I say, whatever we can do to combine these issues, because they are so connected. And we've got to fight them all. And that's what I want to wrap up on, which is, what is the vision of the world we want to live in? And you know what? It's not this rapacious vulture capitalist system that we live under. I'll give anybody $10 who guesses the right answer to this. I was coming here in the plane, and I was reading the Washington Post, and this was an op-ed in the Washington Post. It said, this person spoke about how American capitalism had run aground, how a different sort of business and markets had to be conceived to save us from drowning. And he posed what might be the key question of our time. Does our country exist to serve the interests of the market? Or does the market exist to serve the interests of our nation and our people? And then this person said, we might be inching towards consensus that capitalism is not working for America anymore. Who said it? Who? George Will. Who else? Bernie Sanders. Martin Luther King. Donald Trump. Let me give you a hint. I saved myself $10. The hint is a right-wing senator from the state of Florida, Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio. Don't get up and give him applause, because his idea and his vision is going to be very different. But that brings me back around to the whole thing of Donald Trump saying he's going to get us out of these wars. Marco Rubio says we need a different kind of system. So my point is to say the American people want a different kind of system. And while our media and Donald Trump and others are trying to make people afraid of the word socialism, it's not a dirty word. And guess what? Young people, am I wrong? Am I right? Young people are not afraid of the word socialism, right? Not afraid of it. We've got, and it doesn't matter what we call it either, because it's about changing a system, one that it's based on extraction of fossil fuels to one that's based on regenerative, one that is based on competition to one that is based on cooperation. One that is based on intervention and one that is based on diplomacy. It's a different kind of system. It's a different kind of vision. And it's one that is the very opposite of Donald Trump, because it's also based on kindness, on cooperation, on empathy, on building community. And that's what we need if we're going to survive as a planet. And so I want to end on a positive note, because I think that if we look around at what's happening in the world right now, it's quite remarkable. I know that some of us call it the autumn of discontent, what is happening around the world. There was the Arab Spring, and now many of the same countries in the Arab Spring are now experiencing this autumn of discontent. Iraq, Lebanon, people coming out on the streets by the hundreds of thousands. I know a lot of you work around Latin America. What is happening in Chile is just extraordinary. Chile is the birthplace of the rapacious capitalism in Latin America with the overthrow of the Allende government. And now the people of Chile are standing up and saying, we want, what sparked it? Raising the price of the metro. And all the young people start saying, screw that, we're jumping over the stiles. And they did that. And now it's like, wait, this is no longer about the metro. This is about everything. This is about the whole darn system. We want something totally different. And it's happening in so many places around the world, and you never know what that spark might be. And some of you might have seen the research of Erica Chenworth that says you only need 3.5% of the population to get involved to make a revolution. Right. You get 3.5% of the people out on the streets, no government can resist that. Well, I don't know about you, but I think we could do that. I think we could do that. I think the vision of people wanting something totally different is there. The discontent is there. And we just have to be the ones that keep providing the sparks so that it takes off. And I want to end, because you talked about Martin Luther King, I want to end on that quote about the arc of the moral universe. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but as Martin Luther King said, it bends towards justice. We are at a very dangerous time in our country. We have a man in the White House who, if he doesn't, quote, win in the next election, might not give up power. And we might have to be out in the streets in the millions. And we better be ready for that. Because when the time comes, we got to be out on the streets, not only for one issue, the environment, not only for one issue about racism, not only for one issue about indigenous rights, but about the whole thing, because we want to live in a totally different kind of society. And that's why we got to pull on that arc of the moral universe and make sure that indeed it bends towards justice and we get the system in this country that we as the people deserve. Thank you very much.
Well, we do want some time for questions, but we do also want to really recognize Medea. And first of all, she's singing our song, right? Right? Tell it. That it's one, hashtag unite. So we just like to first, before you might get a question or two, but before we do, first of all, I want to say the Yemeni community wanted to specially recognize you. And in fact, if you weren't here so briefly, they would have had a special event for you in their community. So I want to ask Mona Abdullah to come up here to give you a special gift. And while she is, I want to say that as you're talking, you fight so hard for so many different areas. Certainly just coming back from Cuba, I know Maria and I just went to Cuba. We're going to have an event on November 25th when we're going to talk about that at Canisius College. But the Yemeni community has suffered a lot. So many of our communities have suffered so many ways. And so I'm going to give Mona Abdullah a chance to give you a special gift.
Thanks. Thank you for allowing me to do this. She's always, on the tip of her tongue she's always talking about Yemen. She's always getting dragged by authorities because she's standing up for us. She does so much for us and we really, really appreciate it. So from the Yemeni community, we grant you this gift to thank you.
So you can open it later if you want. You want to make it later?
Yeah.
Okay, because that's easier. And we do want still a little minute for questions, and we still want Nayeli. Can you come up here, please? and come. Oh, there you are. Oh, good. So people are ready because we have some presents for you, especially too. I want to say, first of all, when you talk about stopping the violence, we have the Stop the Violence Coalition over here. We've been working to stop the violence in the street, everywhere, and including you have been too. So anyway, so Niley is here, and our intern here too. So here, you can give you that. See, she didn't even know it was code pink. Yeah. Niley.
Thank you so much.
From Burning Books in Neckanessick. Thank you, Niley. Thank you for coming up. And we also have Heidi Danko, I was saying, our intern from Damon. Thank you. From Damon College. We have some things for you also.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So a lot of them are pink.
Goodies.
Not all.
Oh, beautiful.
But anyway, we are so grateful, and so many of our allies are so grateful because you really do unite all of these things, and they are so all connected. So I want to say, one of the things, we had a little pre-meeting before over lunch, and we decided that at the Western New York Peace Center, we're going to start doing something for Fire Drill Fridays. So look for that. We are going to get people out in the streets. They have done it before. We'll do it more, and we will keep uniting the struggles, working with our allies like Stop the Violence Coalition, Sierra Club, PUSH, and NAACP, and so many other groups. And so many of us, we are women warriors. I could go on and on. Just the Buff State Communications Department, and the so many groups, just Indigenous Women's Initiatives and Burning Books and Neckaness. I really could go on. So I would just say, keep your book, your program book for the dinner. The thrill of having Medea here is so big, and I think that between her and Amy Goodman, we've had a few really excellent speakers for our annual dinner, wouldn't you say? Amy Goodman, Pete Seeger, Medea Benjamin, Kathy Kelly. Who else? We've had a lot of great speakers, actually. So we also know that we just got a speaker for next year. It's going to be, wait for it, Cornell West. Yeah. I think when he heard Medea was over here, he knew where the good action is. So things are happening in Buffalo. That's what people say. When they're in D.C., they say, oh, yeah, they're really happening. So we will be out there. We'll be working harder than ever. We're going to work all this year long. And you might want to get your tickets before too long. It's the Monday after the election.